G'day, I'm Martyn and this is The Truth of It. And today we have quite a smorgasbord of content. First up, we're talking about the Women's March for Justice, solving the sexual abuse crisis that's come to the fore in Parliament. Secondly, we're going to be talking about a Canadian father who has actually lost custody of his own teenage daughter for disagreeing with her gender transition, and he is in fact in jail. And thirdly, we'll be talking about gender quotas. They are back on the agenda. What are we to make of the idea? And finally, my top 3 threats to the survival of Western democracies. But first up, the Women's March for Justice, the protest against sexual misconduct by men. Now, this is an issue that's not going away anytime soon, and 3 recent events have brought it to the forefront in public debate. Firstly, there was the allegations against Attorney General Christian Porter, a woman who is now deceased, apparently claimed that he sexually abused her some 30 years ago, and is now suing the ABC for defamation for reporting those claims. Secondly, Brittany Higgins, a former staffer to Defence Minister Linda Reynolds, alleged that she was raped overnight in Parliament House in the Minister's office by another staffer. And thirdly, Chanel Contos, was a student that put an online petition up over high school students who were telling their stories of sexual abuse and calling on the government to mandate mandatory consent training in school curricula. So the Women's March for Justice kicked off across the country. There was large demonstrations right across a whole number of cities. Now, firstly, I am not going to write off all of the underlying concerns with this one. It's a pig's breakfast of problems, okay? I'm not writing them all off, but I want to be discerning and examine this movement for just a second in order to sort out the wheat from the chaff, the truth from the fiction, the wise from the unwise. It seems to me that this could become Scott Morrison's Black Lives Matter. So Black Lives Matter exploited an election year to make white supremacy the obsessive and singular interest of the media and the political debate, until, of course, Trump lost and he was somehow tarred as being a white supremacist enabler. Well, Scott Morrison is facing a very similar sort of a thing. This is a movement in an election year, making sexual abuse the obsessive interest of the media and of political debate until, well, they hope Morrison loses, right? Somehow having been tarred as a sexual abuse enabler. And the similarities don't stop there. Let's go into the Women's March itself. I think they're a little smarter than Black Lives Matter about their statements online, but there's a few things here which are really important. This is how they phrased their grievances. They said, "We're exhausted from having to listen to those leading our nation and our major companies conceal and deny sexual assault, sexual harassment and abuse of women. We believe that this ongoing abuse occurs as a result of a fundamental lack of equity for women within Australian corporate and political institutions." Don't know if that's my typo or theirs. But that's how they phrase their concern. But let's drill down into something further. This is a further description. This is a quote from their website, or quotes. It says, "March for Justice is an organic uprising with logistics being undertaken at speed by volunteers around the country. Discussions include the critical need to have an intersectional mindset." Now that's very interesting. As Kimberly Crenshaw says, all inequality is not created equal. So these people are interested in the subject of intersectional inequality. That is class warfare stuff, right? So women versus men, gay versus straight, black versus white, transgender versus cisgender. It's all the identity politics stuff. Australia's dominant patriarchal culture, and here we go. They start opening up on that basis. It privileges the white, able-bodied, straight and wealthy. March for Justice organisers and participants need to be ever vigilant against doing the same. We call on all events to ensure a diverse platform of speakers and all organisers to be inclusive in their outreach. Women have been struggling for our rights alone for too long, and enough is enough. We believe in by being inclusive and all genders working together we can achieve more. Notice not both, but all genders. Now, that could very well just about be a quote from a textbook on critical theory or cultural Marxism as it's often known. Learn to spot the signs. The word intersectionality, red flag. It is an invention of critical theory. The notion of struggle is classic Marxism. The identity politics, tribal divides of class, race, sex, so intersectional oppression was the phrase they used. That's all there. The usual allegation of systemic structures of oppression because a country like Australia was founded on white, patriarchal, blah, 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 blah. You know the drill. It's the same old playbook that we have come to see again and again. Now, these protest movements, they pop up seemingly overnight in quick reply to an event or a series of events. They are funded, they are organised, they push a grievance which happens to fall very neatly within one of the identity politics categories, and then weeks later, those like me who dig deeper find the same Marxist ideology. And this is the great frustration for me. These movements pick up on something that is actually true. In this case, it is a deeply felt concern for personal safety which women carry and not without cause. And also it is the cesspool, which is Parliament House, and the disastrous conduct that takes place amongst staffers and all the rest of it up there, which has been known about for years and years and years and years, amongst the media in particular and so on, but of course they're going to use it for their ends now. But anyway, this picks up on something that is very real, but here's the thing. They take a reality and they lie about it. They lie about its extent. They lie about the cause of the evil. They say it resides in a particular tribe, the rich, white, male tribe, for example, conveniently, which makes everybody angry at each other and everybody divided. Then they mount an attack on the tribe, not on the individual. You notice we're now supposed to believe that, or buy into this mob mentality, that Scott Morrison, the family man who puts his wife and his daughters at the centre of pretty much everything he does, it seems, is somehow the figurehead for sexual abuse against women. That's what we're supposed to believe now. That's where the media has actually managed to get us to. Not because he's guilty. Oh, he's not guilty. Mark my words. But his tribe is guilty. The white, male, powerful target, right? That's on his face. It's not the perpetrators to take them to due process and get them into the court system and put them in jail. Oh, that'd be too quiet and it wouldn't have the political ends that these people want. No, no. The target's not on the individual. It's on the tribe. Scott Morrison's the leader of the tribe as the number one political figure who is white, male, able-bodied, etc. It is tribal imputation of guilt. It seems that every time something bad happens, it's turned into a tribal gladiator fight. And I just wonder, when's it going to end? We're going to collapse under the weight of our own hatred and division. A house divided cannot stand. Whites fighting blacks, or blacks fighting whites over white supremacy, women fighting men over patriarchy, gays fighting straights over homophobia. It's cancer. It's gnawing us out from the inside, and it's designed to be cancer. It hates the society that it lives in, and so it must gnaw away at it. Welcome to the delightful and pleasant world that is Marxism. A battle of the sexes, is not going to solve the problem that people are seeing here. It will genuinely make it worse. Identity politics will destroy, divide, cancerously gnaw away at these things and make them worse. But I'm not just here to say what's wrong. I'm actually here to say what's right as well. The truth is, here we are in a situation where we've sexualised absolutely everything for 50 years and we're reaping the whirlwind. What else could we expect? Sadly, sexual liberation means that people have a taste for it and they don't want to give it up. And who knew that men with raging sexual appetites didn't push boundaries and even turn bad in their pursuit of that appetite? That's what sin is like, It's insidious. It's like an appetite. It's tasted, wants more, more, more. I tell you what, blessed are those who have never tasted some of these things because they don't face the same trouble. Unfortunately, the genie is well and truly out of the bottle on this. And in the West, we chose sexual liberty. And therefore it seems that the true solution is so far beyond us. Indeed, the world will mock, it will scoff, it will scorn, it will denigrate the answer. Many people won't even countenance it for themselves, but it doesn't mean it's not the answer. Because we threw the answer away when we decided that it was no longer a virtue to be chaste. Chaste means sexually pure, it means abstinent, it means generally lacking in sexual motive. We chose sexual liberation instead of that. And so we desecrated ourselves, we gave ourselves the appetite, and we seduced others to join us, because you can't do it by yourself, you have to have others join in with you. People wanted liberty, no consequences. Well, here are the consequences. But here's the thing. Let's go back to the solution. If chasteness is a virtue, and it is, then we suddenly have duties around this virtue. We have a duty to honour it in ourselves and a duty to honour it in others. And just like that, problem solved. I'm serious. Think about it. Both men and women have duties in this regard, and they are articulated in Scripture, and I'm going to go through them. First, those aimed at women, which are much less for obvious reasons. But there is something. For example, it does say in Peter that she is to be chaste. It uses the word in her conduct. She is to be modest, and she is to be discreet. Biblical words, biblical commands. Now, unfortunately, women are being encouraged in the opposite direction in this day and age, and I think those qualities are getting rarer and rarer, but there is the Christian standard. By doing those things, she honours a virtue in herself, and she honours a virtue in others. Now, that's not to make her responsible for the sins of others, and that's the lie of these movements. They say, victim blaming. Well, no, hang on. No one said she's responsible for the sins of the others. Okay, that's just not what's going on. However, that does bring me, of course, to men. And of course, like I said, men get a whole lot heavier dose in this area for obvious reasons. He is to treat, and I'm quoting from Timothy, older women as mothers and younger women as sisters in all purity. There's a standard. Also from the words of Jesus in Matthew 5, he is to train himself not to look upon a woman, to lust after her, thus honouring God's law. A memorable rule I once heard on this is, you'll laugh, but bounce your eyes. You see it, you bounce your eyes, you look away. Okay, it's not to look on a woman, to lust after her, according to Jesus. Concerning his wife, a man is told to show her honour and understanding, biblical words, and to love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, Christ died for the church. He is to nourish and cherish, biblical words again, his wife, and also never to covet his neighbour's wife. That's one of the 10 commandments. These are the highest standards you will find for men anywhere, bar none, period. Okay? But it goes further. He's not to respond to temptation either. Proverbs 6 sternly warns men to be like Joseph and to flee from, and I quote, the evil woman, not to, quote, desire her beauty, unquote, or heed her smooth tongue, or let her capture you with her eyelids, it says, because she hunts for a precious life. And that's a quote. And he's further told that he who commits adultery with a woman would destroy himself. So the incorrigible flirt. A man of character ignores her. Immodesty and indecency. And by the way, lots of guys can't do that. But a man of character does it. He ignores her. Immodesty and indecency. A man of character, as I said, bounces his eyes. Or if we up the ante, a porn star. And there's many. A man of character does not watch. A seductress. And they most surely are out there. They surely are. A man of character will turn and run before he can have a second thought, like Joseph did. And he does this out of duty to himself. He does this out of duty to her. He does this out of duty to God. What's going on here? Chasteness, sexual purity. These are virtues, and we are acting so as to honour them in ourselves and in others. Men can break their duty. Women can break their duty. Now, in the case of men, it's often said, and I have said this myself, that the results of the wrongdoing are far more serious because they inflict violence and devastating psychological damage on women. And that is a very grave sin. And that is why women carry a deep personal consciousness of their own security and safety in a way that men do not. And it is why women feel this issue very, very deeply. And it is why women see something like Women's March for Justice and immediately identify with it. And that's kind of the nasty thing about it in a way, because it has some perverted ideology in it, but she connects with it immediately for obvious and clear reasons and not bad reasons. Gosh, where am I up to? But here's the other thing. It's not just men that can do wrong, but if a woman does wrong, so let's say she deliberately seduces a man, okay? Such women do exist, as I said, then the result may not have an appearance of physical or psychological violence. Okay? But see, what I've recently come to realise is that Proverbs 6 teaches us that that does devastating spiritual damage on a man. And so even though the harm is unseen, it is frightful. Now, the reason I'm not supposed to say that in present culture is because we don't accept that purity is a virtue, and so women could have no possible responsibilities to remain pure or to respect it in others, none whatsoever. To say that, in fact, is completely oppressive. Or they use that cheap smear of victim blaming as if I'm somehow pretending that a woman is responsible for the wrongdoing of another, which is baloney. And women who would blame themselves for the wrongdoing of others or their own suffering are very often doing so unjustly. Okay? So let's be clear about that. But there you have it. The proper honouring of a forgotten virtue. That is the answer. They say, well, consent training will solve it. No, it won't. The vast majority of complaints involving consent don't relate to whether consent was given. They only relate to for how long it was given or exactly what it was given for precisely. And so it's a great big fight of he said versus she said. And it's a disaster. It's a pig's breakfast. Far better if they honoured this virtue in the first place. They never would have ended up where they ended up. You know, we as Christians, I believe, have an opportunity to model this very thing in a world that's turned quite filthy. I think that wholesome and chaste people will be most attractive to many and will stand out tremendously and beautifully in a world like this. It has often been said, you know, that the early church was a safe haven for women. That's been observed by a number of historians. I can see why. And it's interesting to me, the stats actually show that the churches in Australia, despite what the woke set will tell you, are mostly female. I can see the issue here. And so there's an opportunity for Christian men to live up to the standard. And I think they're uniquely equipped to live up to the standard, because let's be real about this. The only way a man will bring his passions and desires into submission to these standards, and the only way these standards for men and women will be followed by men and women, is if people fear God, is if people bring themselves into submission to the will and ways of God. That's the only way. And so here is our opportunity. Bullseye. Second up. Father loses custody of transgender daughter. That's right, I was going to talk to you about Robert Hoogland, a Canadian father, and his travails with the education system, the health system, the legal system, which ultimately have seen him wind up in jail for not accepting his child's gender transition from female to male. Now, wherever we find these family law cases, I want to make this proviso. It's never clean cut, it's never straightforward, it's as messy as it gets, it's family law. I'm not here to say who's been perfect and blameless. I'm not here to say who's evil and who's good. I'm not going to pretend that it's been clear and clean cut. I'm sure it hasn't. I'm sure it could have been better at every turn. However, there are underlying issues here in this case which are not going away anytime soon, and which we must understand, because they are spreading across the Western world. Mr. Hoogland's child was a biological girl. She's born in 2004. She started identifying as a boy at the tender age of 11. Hormone therapy was commenced in 2018 when the child was 14. Mr. Hoogland has tried to stop this from happening at every stage, but he has been thwarted by the courts every single time, and this has led him to talking publicly about his case in defiance of court orders, which has ultimately put him in jail as of March 2021. When she was in the 7th grade, Mr. Hoogland's daughter told a school counsellor that she identified as a boy, and it is alleged that this followed the teaching of a gender curriculum in the school called SOGI 123 and watching a film about gender fluidity. And the school helped her to pick out a male name, treated her as a boy as part of one of those so-called social transitions, change uniform, change bathroom, change pronoun, etc. And she was referred to as a boy by parents, peers and teachers. Multiple sources indicate that this was done without informing the parents. Now, before you take a sharp intake of breath, all these possibilities exist in schools in Australia right now, and indeed in most Western countries. Schools are allowed to do this. School counsellors are a thing. Gender curriculum are in all government schools. I've been pointing this out for some time now. This is wholly possible in Australia. Indeed, there are cases a little bit like this, or that have shades of this already in Australia and other Western countries. So we must understand that. Her school recommended that she see a psychologist who treats children with gender dysphoria, and the psychologist in question was the author of a transgender children's book. So we know where this is going, and that psychologist referred her to a gender clinic at a children's hospital. And for those who follow these matters, you know that once you're in the gender clinic, it's very unlikely you're going to go back. Because indeed the Tavistock case out of the United Kingdom High Court found that once kids get to the clinic, it's exceedingly rare for them to be turned away. They usually go on puberty blockers, which is an all but a guarantee of irreversible hormone therapy. So there you go. On the 14th of August 2018, the clinic recommended hormone therapy as being in this child's best interests. The child and her mother signed a consent form for testosterone treatments, and 5 days later, Mr. Hoogland decided that he would email the gender clinic because he found out about it, saying that he did not consent to the treatment. Now, it's important to note that as part of the custody agreement between Mr. Hoogland and his ex-wife, they had joint authority over matters of medical treatment, etc. The agreement actually said that they had joint authority, or each had joint authority over giving, refusing, or withdrawing consent to medical, dental, and other health-related treatments. So the court had ordered that this was part of his purview, okay? So on 1st of December 2018, the clinic wrote to Mr. Hoogland to let him know that his consent was not actually required, but his refusal to give that consent was immaterial because his daughter, at the tender age of 14, was competent to consent to her own irreversible hormone treatment. Now, that fact that she was competent was subsequently confirmed by a court order. We're talking about a 14-year-old here, can't even give consent to getting a tattoo under law, it's not lawful, who probably doesn't even have control over her own bedtime, who can't go out at night, can't drink, can't smoke, can't do anything autonomously, but can make a decision like this. Now, the first major pushback we've had on this fact was from the Tavistock case out of the United Kingdom High Court. You can search my video that I did on that where I unpack it. And the Tavistock case, the judges actually ruled that a child of this age simply is exceedingly unlikely, which is as strong legal speak as you get, to be able to consent to such a treatment, to understand the implications of infertility and all these kinds of things. It's just not possible. But of course, that doesn't apply to this context in Canada. So Dad is cut out for good. He has no right to medical information, and he has no say over consent. Now, the Supreme Court proceedings which followed made the whole situation probably worse, if anything. He lost, and the Supreme Court confirmed it was in the best interest of his daughter to get on with the treatment without delay. And they criticised Mr Hoogland for playing some games with the timing of court applications and that to try and drag things out. It's kind of hard to blame him, although he probably shouldn't have done that. But here's the kicker. The court further ordered, 1, it is in the best interest of his daughter to be referred to as a male and to be identified by a male name. The court ordered that. Secondly, it will be considered family violence under the Family Law Act to attempt to persuade her to abandon her treatment, or to address her by her birth name, or to refer to her as a girl, either directly or indirectly, or to third parties. Wow, that will be considered family violence. So a further court order was made to restrain Hoogland from trying to persuade his daughter to stop her treatment and also to stop him referring to her by her birth name and gender, to basically double down on that court order because he had gone out into public and kept calling her she and had tried to persuade her not to go ahead with it. And they said, well, okay, we're going to make another court order to stop you from continuing to do that. And then there was another court order which prohibited him from sharing any information at all about her medical treatment, including the name of doctors or the status of medical therapies and so forth. So now the whole thing is being done in the shroud of secrecy. The judge also said that Mr Hoogland had committed family violence by giving media interviews referring to his daughter as a she and by the birth name. Mr Hoogland appealed that, and the appeal court basically didn't change anything. They downgraded it from family violence, but they doubled down on the orders against him. Here's a quote from the Court of Appeal. In general, caution should be exercised in limiting a parent's discretion, guided by their own opinion and belief, to parent as they see fit. However, as we have noted, this is a unique case that involves a father's disagreement about what is in his child's best interest in relation to the child's identity, gender and medical treatment for which the child has validly consented. So it comes down to the fact that she had validly consented because she was able to consent to her own treatment, even though she can't consent to pretty much anything else. The father's refusal to respect his child's decisions regarding his gender identity is troublesome. His is the child. The evidence shows that his rejection of the child's identity has caused the child significant pain and has resulted in a rupture of what both parties refer to as an otherwise loving parent-child relationship. This rupture is not in the child's best interests. He clearly wants and needs acceptance and support from the father. So the court's saying you need to accept this. You must. There's no other way around. Now, Mr Hoogland has actually continued to speak publicly about his case, and in those public forums he has continued to refer to his child as his daughter. Result? Well, it's convoluted legally, but he is in jail as of March the 16th, and he's in jail for a criminal trial that will commence in April, and he may be imprisoned for up to 5 years. Let me finish by making this reasonably lengthy but important quote from Mr Hoogland in his own words. So enough of me talking about him, let's hear from him. He says, I'm thinking about these doctors. Here I am facing time in prison, and these two doctors who are so proud of the work that they're doing in transitioning children are actually cowards hiding behind children. They are continuing to commit what I consider crimes against humanity, and they are using the government to silence me so that I can't call them out on this. If they are so proud of it, why are they hiding? Why don't they come out and tell everybody how great it is what they're doing? This is the fact that he's legally not allowed to say who they are or what they're up to, okay? This speaks volumes as to what they're trying to cover up. They don't want you to know what they're doing with your children. And by disguising it as policy, they don't have to tell parents what's going on with it. What they will tell you is that it is used to protect children from their parents. How insane is that? Because they are saying parents are biased, parents will discriminate, parents will do all these terrible things because they don't agree that their child who is a girl is really a boy. So we need to protect these children from their parents. They're taking kids during school time out to get hormone shots. Parents don't know what's going on until it's too late. They're not even informing parents that their child is being transitioned anymore. Rapists get 2 years in prison. I'm looking at 5 years. Put that into perspective. That tells you how important this is to the government in their experimenting on children. But these kids are going to be handed a life sentence. It is irreversible, and it is, by the way. They will be sterile. They won't have families. A lot of them will eventually choose to commit suicide because they're compounding their mental health issues with this, and that is also true. They've been falsely told that they can change from a girl to a boy, which is impossible, and now they're somewhere in the middle. So my 5 years is nothing compared to the prison these kids are being put in for the rest of their lives. There's that moment when a court tells the parent who's against this that their child's going to be given cross-sex hormones regardless of what they want. And that moment is such a defeating moment because you know that your child is now going to be irreversibly damaged. And to sit and watch that happen, knowing it was completely avoidable, is the worst feeling for a parent. A lot of people are still in denial about all this. They'll hear my story and say, Rob must be exaggerating. It can't be like that. This is Canada. There's no way that this could be happening. Do you know, well, let me close with this actually. That's from the father. I think that's all just bang on the money. And that is what's happening. Gender dysphoria is a body dysmorphic condition. That's not a controversial thing to say, it is. Another body dysmorphic condition is anorexia nervosa. That is, a person's mindset is not aligned with their physical body. And this madness is as mad as a 14-year-old girl with anorexia nervosa going into a doctor and then being called competent to consent to her own liposuction, to bring her body into alignment with her mind, and then getting court orders to make it a crime for her parents to talk about what the doctor is doing, or discourage their daughter from undergoing the procedure, or telling their daughter that she is not fat, or referring to their daughter as anything other than obese, or speaking publicly about the matter. That's what's happening here. That's what's happening. Rod Dreher, in his book, Live Not by Lies, he says the West is facing a crisis of therapeutic totalitarianism. Total power being exercised over every sphere of life, even the family and the church in other legislation. I'll get to that later in this episode. Total power being exercised in the name of what? Wellness, safety, well-being. That's the justification here. The best interests of this child. Well, I'll tell you what, the best interests of this child are far better understood by its parents than by the state, and that is nearly always true. This is, I agree with Robert Hoogland, this is a humanitarian crisis. This is happening in our midst with 1,000, 2,000% increases in children on things like hormone therapies in our nations. This is the great crisis unfolding before us, and we can barely find a politician to fight it. I tell you what, we need to stand up on this. I will keep talking about it. People say I get obsessed. Well, you know what? This is a humanitarian crisis. It demands our urgent action. And if not the Christians, then who? I think this is up to us. Thirdly, gender quotas. This one should be quite a quick topic, actually, but I want to talk about this because of everything that's been going on with this business of Scott Morrison now being apparently the pin-up for gendered violence against women, even though he's not actually done any of these things. He puts his daughters, he puts his wife at the centre of his life. His whole life and example is opposed to this sort of behaviour. But of course, with the cultural Marxist stuff, guilt doesn't run by individuals, it runs in tribes. And so rather than just quietly allowing the due process to play out for these rape cases and make sure that the people that did it actually go down for it and end up in jail, no, this has to be weaponised into a political cause against an entire tribe. What's the entire tribe? Well, it is the white, able, powerful men. Scott Morrison is the kingpin of that group. He must repent. And that's exactly what we've seen in the last few days. The media have trawled him out and he's basically grovelled, is basically what he's done to make the pain stop. I'm not sure that it will stop. Now, if you don't, just to be clear, for those of you who are viewing this as a segment by itself and haven't seen the earlier segment, the Women's March for Justice has made it clear that this is their ideology. It's not hidden. So I'm not saying anything particularly revolutionary, except that I'm joining the dots for us. But here's the thing, the upshot is that the Liberal Party are tearing themselves apart over this age-old gender quota debate. Do they need to have quotas for women in politics, in ministerial positions? Should politicians be getting plum rolls because they're female in order to boost female numbers in positions of power? Now, there's a few things to be said here. Firstly, I just want to make this clear. It seems that identity politics has so affected us that we've forgotten that what is good for all. That righteous decision-making, good governance, responsible use of power are the same for a politician whether that politician doing the things is black or white or gay or straight or man or woman or able or disabled or whatever else. The classes defined by identity politics are just not that relevant when it comes to accessing truth. There's some kind of weird Gnostic view of the world here where because of the melanin concentration in your skin or something like this, you have some access to a different plane of truth. And therefore, if we're going to put people in positions like politics, well, we need to have quotas of all these different kinds of truths. No, what's right is right for everybody. What's good governance? What's righteous governance is righteous governance for everybody. It just doesn't work that way. Good is good for all. Evil is evil for all. If we accept the identity politics line, there's no end to quotas. Women, men, then you've got all the different ethnicities, you'd have quotas for them, all the different sexualities. What if you had a quota for all the different genders? You'd have a lot of politicians. It just doesn't end. It's a crazy path to start walking down. The identity politics line is wrong. It doesn't work that way. But there's something more. I'm interested to investigate this question of what it says about us as a society when we seriously believe that women should have a 50% representation, particularly in political and corporate settings. What do I mean? Well, there's an opportunity cost to that. That is to say, it means that we lose something. And it means, bluntly, let's say the obvious, it means we lose full-time mothers. It means, actually, let's say a little bit less than that, let's say it means we lose most of the time mothers, because that's an exceedingly common demographic, for good reasons. I'm an employer, and part-time work to most of the time mothers is very, very common. These are women who have basically their hearts in their family, but they work part-time because they raise more money to complement, the other income in the family, that kind of thing. We lose this. We lose this aspect of motherhood, obviously. So a career like this is basically a career for career women. Is that good to force that in such a way that it's pretty much all women? Is it worth it? What does it say about where we rank family in the hierarchy of importance? What does it say about where we rank motherhood in the hierarchy of importance? What does it say about where we rank children in the hierarchy of importance? What does it say about our attitude to some of the things that women commonly dedicate their lives to for their families? The truth is, we basically don't care about those things. We don't encourage those things. I heard the Liberals very often state their economic policy in terms of getting as many women into the workforce as possible. I've heard that many times from the current government. We don't care about the implications. We don't care about the other side of this coin. It's all about forcing families to lose both parents to the workforce. The truth is we don't care about the thing that's being left behind, the family. And I know that because what I'm saying and what I'm about to say is mocked at the very best. It's attacked with vigour as oppressive and downtreading and me being a white patriarchal man or whatever at the very worst. A woman who serves an employer does an uncontroversial thing. It is affirmed and it is uncontroversial to affirm it. Quotas, right? Completely uncontroversial. A woman who serves a family does a controversial thing, and affirming it in particular. Actually trying to calibrate policy settings to encourage it or allow it, because many women would want it. And many who can't do it nonetheless want it. That is controversial. A woman who seeks power is applauded as strong and independent and liberated. A woman who seeks to serve is overlooked. She's held in low esteem. It is interesting to me that one of the biggest themes in Scripture is the godly mother who is loved and used by God. It's a theme that is consistently overlooked by many a woman's Bible study, many a woman's conference, but it is a strong theme. I've done this at a GPS program. You go through them, there's heaps. Let's take just a few. Jochebed, mother of Moses, Aaron and Miriam, who hid her son from Pharaoh and prayed for him, and he became the mightiest Old Testament figure. Or Leah, whose story of finding favour with God, despite her troubles, is told through the names that she actually gives for her children, climaxing with, now I will praise God, is the meaning, I think that's the meaning of Judah. I hope that's right. But it goes through the story of her travails, through the names. Hannah, whose son changed the world. Samuel, what an incredible son, because she prayed for him and promised him up to God. Or Mary, whose unconscious virtue made her the mother of Christ. She who had no power, no politics, nothing whatsoever except herself and her heart to serve God, and God used her motherhood to save the world, literally, in that case. Now that is an expression of God's affirmation of the mother. It is unbelievably strong. In fact, in Genesis 3:15, the first ever promise that a Messiah would come to save the world, how was he to come? Through the seed of the woman, an archaic expression meaning he's going to have a mum. He's going to be born into the world. I don't like quotas not because I don't think any women should be in politics and business. I do not think that, okay? So don't take that away from this. I just don't like quotas because it says something about where women ought to be. And I don't think we can say that they ought to choose this. I don't think that's right. All women will not be in politics and business, and I wouldn't expect to see quite as many women in those places or running the country as men if families were wonderfully healthy and rich and strong. I wouldn't expect it, and I don't think we should expect it. Since I'm saying controversial things, I might as well read Titus 2, 3-5. This is controversial, but it's scriptural, man. This is the Bible. Older women, it says, likewise, to be reverent in their behaviour, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good, so that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, etc., so that the word of God will not be dishonoured. Why did I read that? Simply to say this: a mother who keeps a home does a fine thing, does a virtuous thing, does a biblical thing, does a good thing, okay? Doesn't mean that women don't belong in other places. It's not a matter of exclusion, but it is a matter of focus. And I think the biblical, the Christian focus is family, not power. And it bothers me that there are young women who are believing a lie about all this, throwing themselves headlong into career only to find that she doesn't have a career at all. Like 99.9% of the world, she has a job. And the job is affected by the curse, right? Because the curse was a curse on work, remember, back in Genesis. Oh, and it's a trudge and it's a toil and it's just not that fulfilling. And she starts to think, well, maybe I want something else. And by that time, she might have missed her chance to marry and have a family. Now, I say this because I see it all around me. I'm in that age bracket where I see women all around me, my age, making this discovery. It really is painful. It's not good because they have not been trained by older women, as it says in Titus, because they have listened to lies from the world around them, and half the time it's probably not even their fault. This is not good. If you're woke, then you're just going to say, well, that's a white, powerful, able, wealthy man viciously oppressing the ladies, doing harm to them and violence in order to cling fervently to my own power, because I want to be the powerful one. Whatever. If I wanted power, I would have kept starting businesses and making squillions of dollars. But to those of you who actually listen and hear truth, well, as the scriptures say, he that has an ear, let him hear. And the truth is, quotas, I don't reckon. I've got no problem with women being in politics. But quotas, what does it say about what we're willing to give up? I think, controversially, sadly, it's a bad idea. All right, finally, I'm going to mention the top 3 biggest threats, in my humble opinion, to Western democracies across the world. This is something a little bit different. The 3 big ideas that I have here, I believe, are the greatest threats to Western nations right now. I think, if I think about it a bit longer, I might come up with a 4th or a 5th, or one that's bigger than all of these, but this is a pretty good first crack, I think. All of them are internal threats, they're not external. I don't think that the West is so much in danger of a military conflict as we are of destroying ourselves. And the destruction is happening in 3 big ways. And I'm big word warning, but I'm going to explain these in very succinct and very easy and understandable ways. Number 1, therapeutic totalitarianism. Number 2, identity politics. Number 3, self-love. 3 big ideas that are killing us. The first one, therapeutic totalitarianism. It's a phrase that I've stolen from a guy called Rod Dreher, for those of you who know him, but I believe it to be incredibly insightful. He's written a great book, by the way, about this, Live Not by Lies. Got to read it. It refers to the woke establishment seizing total power over pretty much everything in the name of preventing harm. What do I mean by the woke establishment? I mean the power of the media, politics, big tech, corporates, and education, to get them all singing from the same hymn sheet, because they do sing from the same hymn sheet more and more. So that's the woke establishment. They have power really to shape society in big ways. By power over pretty much everything, I mean families, schools, businesses, churches, etc. And I mean down to the finest details, including how we speak. In the name of preventing harm, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean actions which are said to promote safety, wellness, well-being, and harm reduction. What would be some examples of this? Well, my earlier segment on Robert Hoogland is an amazing example. A Canadian father discovers that his 11-year-old daughter has been taught about transgenderism at school, then talked to by a school counsellor about it, then recommended to a psychologist who's written children's books about transgender concepts. He tries to intervene to stop it, but the court says no. His daughter is given the right to consent. The doctors are given the right to privacy. Mr. Hoogland is gagged from mentioning the case by court order. Why? Well, apparently his daughter's best interests, for her well-being, to prevent harm. So a child who can't even choose their own bedtime is to undergo irreversible gender transition therapies against the express wishes of her own father, and he cannot talk about it, and those responsible cannot be named. Then he talked about it anyway, because he wanted everyone to know and wake people up to what's happening, and he's in jail, facing 5 years in prison. Stated ends, therapy. Means, totalitarian. Speech controlled, family invaded, education system weaponized, and so forth. Therapeutic totalitarianism. That's what we're talking about. Another example would be so-called conversion therapy laws. Human rights bodies are empowered to conduct secret, wide-ranging investigations into whomever they like if they think that they may be engaging in conduct which could suppress a person's gender identity or sexual orientation. That may capture church sermons, prayers, Parents like Mr. Hoogland, more definitely parents like Mr. Hoogland. Non-LGBTQ affirming messages of any kind. Doctors who don't give affirmative treatment to a gender dysphoric child. Or schools that don't promote the LGBTQ agenda. Codes of conduct for enrolment in different places. All this stuff, it goes on and on, the possibilities are endless. These are all potential crimes, punishable by up to 10 years in jail. That is the Victorian Change and Suppression Bill here in Australia. Why? Well, to stop harm, they say. To keep LGBTQ people safe, they say. To stop suicides, they say. They'll invade churches, families, professions like medicine and more. They will control speech, conduct and everything else down to the tiniest detail. Stated ends, well-being. Means, totalitarian. Or hate speech laws. Huge part of this agenda. They've been weaponised in such a way that they've changed the definition of harm. So you're not allowed to say things that harm people, right? Well, harm used to be defined basically as physical harm with a few exceptions. So that was a very liberty-enhancing concept. But no, harm has been expanded in its scope and definition so much now that you harm someone if they disagree with you and they're in a victim identity group. And so all of a sudden harm has reduced what you can say to such an extent that it's now a freedom-limiting concept, not a freedom-enhancing concept. So ideas that are politically objectionable, ideas that question or don't affirm a minority group in that intersectional list of minorities that we're all used to, LGBT and women and trans, all that stuff, people of colour, all of that stuff all of a sudden is prohibited speech because free speech is unpredictable speech. Unpredictable speech, aha. Well, that lets ideas out that the woke establishment doesn't like, and so that must be punished. And speech is being punished with more and more severe penalties all the time. It used to be that if you spoke, you'd get argued back at. Now if you speak, you could face law, hate speech laws, or have things like, for example, Israel Folau. Remember I said the woke establishment, so it includes corporates, and you've got Israel Folau who's been banned for life from his sport for saying something. Incredible. So hate speech. What is the stated ends? Harm reduction. We can't say harmful, hurtful things. Means totalitarian. Briefly, let me make this observation. This is why people like me have been a little bit disquieted, a little bit unnerved about the way governments in the West have been handling COVID-19. It's why we've been sensitive to overreaches, overreactions, totalitarian tendencies, actions which don't match the severity of the situation, for there have been so many. Power-drunk actions, excessive actions. This has been very big in some states in Australia. It's been particularly big in some overseas countries. Why? Because it's the same dynamic. It's people giving away rights and freedoms, their very livelihoods, their freedom to worship, their freedom to gather, their freedom to do all sorts of things, even their freedom to even meet with their families sometimes. What for? In the name of safety. And we're going to see these sorts of rights in exchange for safety bargains as a hallmark of this coming era in the West. They're dangerous. Why? Therapeutic totalitarianism. And the sort of statism, the sort of totalitarianism we're going to see is not so much the traditional variety that you saw in communist countries and so forth. It's going to come in through this mindset. Threat number one, by far the longest, next to a shorter. Second threat, identity politics. What is identity politics? Well, let me use a definition that I read from proponents of identity politics. They say that their identity is their politics in this way. They ask, what is my identity? Their identity is intersectional. In other words, it's described according to the usual menu of attributes that we're going to get used, that we're all used to now: white, male, able, rich, straight, cisgendered, or black, female, disabled, gay, transgender, etc., defined by those classes. Then, having measured my identity according to my intersectionality score, I discover all the ways in which the political systems around me are oppressing me, hating me, holding me down. Then I get very upset, I get very angry, I turn everything into a game of politics and power so that I might be able to destroy those structures that are oppressing me and get the power I need to be happy. This is making our young people very miserable. It's making them very angry. It's dividing man against woman, black against white, trans against cis, gay against straight, rich against poor. It is a battle to the death over power. That's pretty much what it is. Death is hyperbole, but I can see in some societies it would not be hyperbole. It's a flame that could become a fire, which has shocking results. But the worst thing about identity politics for me is the way it imputes guilt and innocence. Take Black Lives Matter. Who was guilty? Whites were guilty. Not Derek Chauvin, I think that was his name, the police officer that kneeled on George Floyd's neck. No, not him, but whiteness. And so there was year-long violent and riotous protests, anger, right? Throwing over the establishment. against whiteness. And white people were forced to kneel and repent, including police officers and all sorts, for their whiteness. And those who rioted were never held to proper account. Oh no, they were innocent because they have more melanin in their skin or because they're rioting against the oppression. That's the way innocence and guilt are imputed, not individually to the people responsible, but to tribes. Right now, our Prime Minister is being held up by the media as the punching bag for sexual abuse of women. Not because he's guilty. In fact, the whole mode of life that he lives puts such abusers to shame. His wife and his daughters are clearly central to his life. But the Women's March for Justice made it very clear. They're opposed to whiteness, patriarchy and power. Scott Morrison is the pin-up for all three. It is tribal. It is not individual guilt. This kind of inflamed division between us will tear us down from within. It is cancerous. And it will also destroy innocent people over politics and power. It's a grave threat to the West. It'll destroy goodness, destroy good people, and it will gnaw away from within with division and anger. Notice what Galatians 5:19-21 says about the fruits, the deeds of the flesh. It says they're evident. They're sexual immorality, impurity, indecent behaviour, idolatry, witchcraft, hostilities, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. So many of those are absolute hallmarks of this cultural Marxist identity politics mindset. It promotes them. Finally, number 3, self-love. And this refers to the decadent obsession we have with our own well-being and the morbid preoccupation that we have with ourselves. I call it self-love. Some people have even tried to turn it into a virtue. It is not a virtue. It is the opposite of virtue. In the West, we have undergone a period at which is the rise and the rise of self. It's seen in our vocabulary. For one thing, we say identity, self-love, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-care, self-expression, selfies, me time, all this stuff. But worse than that, we say things like, it was right for me. In other words, a moral code made in my image. I decide what's right and wrong. Or even worse, people say, well, God to me is like this or like that. Oh, so now God is in my image. We're labouring under the ultimate idolatry of the self. It takes that which comes from my own heart, my passions, my desires, my lusts, and it indulges them as if they're good for me and worthy to be expressed. Romans 1:25 says it's the ultimate sin of any society that we would exchange the truth about God for the lie and worship and serve the creature rather than Creator. We'd use ourself to define the parameters of all things. And we do live like the creators. We think that we get away with it, that we decide whether we're male and female, or we decide to define our sexual passions as gay or straight and legitimize them. Or worse, we get to define what is, moral code. People often say, well, it was right for me. Number one justification for something like a divorce is, well, it was right for us. Mate, whether it was right for you is completely irrelevant. Ask what's right and submit yourself to it to honour God, not yourself, because you are not God. You don't say what is right and wrong. And this is the result. The result of this era is moral decadence. We serve our passions, we serve our lusts, we serve our desires, we do what we please, we do what was right in our own eyes, and it is the root of the West's immorality. Now this is tragic. We're even starting to bring this into the church. We're starting to say that to love people is basically not to hurt their feelings. No, to love people is to serve their highest and best interests, and they're defined by God, not by their feelings. Or we take the second greatest commandment, love your neighbour as yourself, and you're like, see, it says love yourself. So if I can't love my neighbour until I love myself, you've just reversed the commandment, literally. It says love your neighbour as yourself. It's assuming that you love yourself because you're a human being, right? That's just how we're wired. The command is therefore to apply a standard to neighbour. We rewire everything in light of this self-love, this ultimate idolatry. Do you know what it does? It makes you selfish, full of yourself, self-absorbed. It undermines love of neighbour, and it undermines particularly your love of God because you feel you are self-righteous and you create your own moral code. Indeed, this is the biggest concern that I have coming out of the self-love problem. A self-righteous society, a self-loving society, feels no shame at its own sin. It can't imagine that we need to repent because we've inflated our sense of self to the point where we're no longer sinners. We say, oh no, we're all just messy and broken and struggling with mental health, but we're not serious sinners. Nobody ever became a Christian, without repentance. It is not possible. And nobody ever repented who did not know that they were sinful. And so what this ideology is doing, it is immunizing us against the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is immunizing us against seeing our own sinfulness before God. It is immunizing us against submission to God himself. The first sermon ever preached at Pentecost, the effect was that they were cut to the heart and cried out, "What shall we do?" And Peter said, "Repent and believe." Or indeed, it was the first word of Jesus and John the Baptist, repent. We live in a society that rejects that message. I think that's the West's biggest sickness. It says no to the gospel of Jesus Christ because it loves itself. I trust that we don't occupy churches that in more subtle ways do the same. I'm Martyn, and that was the truth of it. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, then make sure to hit the like button. If you want to never miss another video again, make sure to subscribe, or you can right now watch more videos right here. Cheers.